Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights virtual program on embracing diversity, women's rights in the 21st century. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items so you all know how to participate in tonight's event. This program will be recorded. Given this is a webinar, guests will not be able to be seen on camera. Nonetheless, as an audience, you will have access to drop questions in the Q&A tab, and you do have the option to submit questions anonymously. All audience members, cameras, and microphones will be off as well. Due to time constraints, please keep all questions on topic. Please note that questions we do not get to this evening will be answered as a follow-up after the event. You may also email us at communityrelations@njcivilrights.gov. Resource links and contact information will be shared in the chat throughout the program. If you experience any technical difficulties tonight, please explain your problem through the chat feature, and we will try our best to address the issue. Lastly, please follow the Division on Civil Rights on Facebook and Twitter at Civil Rights NJ for the latest information and news, resources, and information from our office. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tisha Leonardo Santiago. Tisha serves as a bilingual community relations specialist on the Community Relations Unit for the Division on Civil Rights.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Embracing Diversity, Women's Rights in the 21st Century virtual program. Whether born a woman or coming to live in your authentic self, those of us who identify as women may be granddaughters, daughters, sisters, aunts, spouses, parents, and caregivers. But we're also contributors and pioneers in all fields, from medicine to technology, to engineering, mathematics, to business, to education and international policies. We continue to redefine who we are to ourselves, to those around us, and society. With every victory, whether small or large, empowering us along the way. The women's rights movement at the turn of the 20th century began with our right to vote. Over the decades, we have fought to obtain protections in employment, housing, and places of public accommodation, as well as to the rights over our own body, a fight that we continue today. In March of 2020, life changed as we knew it. Many of us still recovering from the emotional, physical, and economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic that had on us and our loved ones. The effects of the pandemic on the job market were widespread and varied by gender and across race and ethnicity groups. For example, women were disproportionately affected by the pandemic-induced recession in the spring of 2020, in part reflecting their overrepresentation in some of the hardest hit sectors of the economy. Black and Hispanic women were much more likely to be among the working poor than white and Asian women. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, in 2020, women's annual earnings were 82.3% of men's, and the gap is even wider for many women of color. And women of color and those in low-wage occupations have been the most impacted. Tonight, we will discuss employment rights and the barriers women face in the workplace with our panelists, Julie Diaz, Suzanne A. Kim, and Deborah Lancaster. Julie Diaz was named Chief of Staff of the New Jersey Department of Labor and Workforce Development in January of 2018, backed by a long career of service to workers in the Garden State. As Chief of Staff, Diaz works closely with the Commissioner and her executive colleagues to develop and administer Department of Labor's wide array of programs and services designed to uplift New Jersey workers and businesses, in addition to overseeing all aspects of the department's internal operations. Suzanne A. Kim is a professor of law and Judge Denny Chin Scholar at Rutgers Law School. Her research and teachings focus on social inequality, family, gender, anti-discrimination, procedure and constitutional law, and access to justice at the intersection of law, critical theory, and social sciences. She is the founding director of the Rutgers Center for Gender, Sexuality, Law, and Policy. And our final panelist, Deborah Lancaster, is the Executive Director of the Center for Women in Work at Rutgers University. The Center for Women in Work is committed to advancing research, education, and programming that promotes economic and social equity for women, their family, and communities. The center's recent work has included a study on the implementation of paid family leave in New Jersey, a collaboration with community partners to document the working conditions of domestic workers, and a project exploring the effects of the unpredictable scheduling on women workers and their families. Tonight's agenda and full biographies for each panelist will be dropped in the chat and also included on the Division on Civil Rights website. Into today's panel discussion, I want to introduce or reintroduce you to the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights, the New Jersey Law Against Discrimination, New Jersey Family Leave Act, and how to file a complaint on the New Jersey Bias Investigation Access System. In April of 1945, World War II was ending, and America's fight against Nazism abroad highlighted for many the evils of racism at home. Black New Jersey veterans who had risked their lives in Europe returned to New Jersey rightfully demanding equal treatment. Dr. James O. Hill, a state assemblyman from Newark, sponsored the New Jersey Law Against Discrimination bill to prevent discrimination in employment based on race, creed, color, national origin, and ancestry. The bill was unanimously approved by the legislature and signed by Governor Walter Edge on April 16, 1945, and went into effect that day, making it the first civil rights statute of its kind in the country. The Law Against Discrimination declared the mission of the Division on Civil Rights to prevent and eliminate discrimination in the state of New Jersey. Today, Division on Civil Rights also enforces the New Jersey Family Leave Act and the Fair Chance and Housing Act. In the 77 years since 1945, the Law Against Discrimination has been amended hundreds of times to move New Jersey closer to the promise of equal justice, equal opportunity, and equal dignity for every person. It is currently one of the most comprehensive anti-discrimination laws in the country and applies in employment, even if the employer has one employee, housing except 2 family dwellings, and all places open to the public, including businesses, restaurants, schools, summer camps, medical providers, government offices, and agencies, etc. The Law Against Discrimination identifies the list of protected classes identified on the slide that prohibit discrimination and harassment based on an actual or perceived characteristic. So for example, if one employee repeatedly subjects another employee to anti-gay slurs that could violate the Law Against Discrimination, even if the employee targeted was not actually gay, what matters is that the harasser was targeting the employee because of their perceived sexual orientation, regardless of what their actual sexual orientation is. Other examples of what is prohibited under the Law Against Discrimination are discriminatory treatments or statements, sexual harassment or any bias-based harassment, failure to accommodate, pay discrimination, which is only applicable in employment, as well as retaliation. In 2018, Governor Murphy signed into law the Diane B. Allen Equal Pay Act to end pay discrimination based on race, sex, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, age, disability, and other protected characteristics in New Jersey by expanding upon the equal pay protections that already existed under the Law Against Discrimination. It is unlawful to pay an employee who is a member of a protected class less than an employee who is not a member of a protected class for substantially similar work. Now, an employer can pay a different rate to those who perform substantially similar work if there's a rate is different because of a seniority or merit system, or if the differential pay is based on legitimate bona fide factors other than membership to a protected class. All forms of compensation are covered under the Equal Pay Act, including salary, bonuses, health benefits, and pension plan contributions. Employers cannot, I repeat, cannot reduce pay of other employees to comply with the law, retaliate against employees who bring Equal Pay Act claims, require employees to agree not to discuss compensation as a condition of employment, and a separate violation of the Equal Pay Act occurs every time you receive a paycheck paying you a lower wage for substantially similar work. The law against discrimination prohibits discrimination and harassment based on actual or perceived gender. Gender discrimination includes discrimination based on gender stereotypes, gender identity or expression, or pregnancy and breastfeeding status. This means that people of all genders, including female, male, intersex, gender nonconforming, or gender non-binary individuals, must be treated equally at work, in housing, and places open to the public. An employer may not make employment decisions like hiring or firing, promotions, pay, or benefits based on actual or perceived gender or based on stereotypes. For example, an employer cannot differentiate between employees of different genders in its provision of parental leave based on stereotypes about who is primarily responsible for childcare. The law against discrimination also prohibits harassment based on gender in a way that creates a hostile environment. Bias-based gender harassment can include unwelcome, offensive conduct because of a person's gender, such as a coworker constantly making disparaging remarks about women. And an employer cannot retaliate against a person for exercising or attempting to exercise these or any other rights under the law against discrimination. The law against discrimination prohibits sexual harassment. Sexual harassment can include verbal harassment, such as obscene language, demeaning comments, physical harassment, such as unwanted touching, visual harassment, such as displaying pornographic images, cartoons, or drawings. There are generally two types of sexual harassment: quid pro quo and hostile environment. Quid pro quo harassment is when a benefit, such as a promotion, is conditioned on sexual favors, or when an adverse action like getting fired is threatened if you refuse sexual advance. Hostile environment is when you are subjected to unwanted harassing conduct of a sexual nature that is severe or pervasive. An employer must take action to stop sexual harassment if it knows or should have known about it. So for example, if a coworker inappropriately touches you or discusses your body in graphic detail in front of your supervisor, your employer must take action. An employer cannot retaliate against you for objecting to sexual harassment or filing a sexual harassment complaint or attempting to exercise your rights or any other rights under the law against discrimination. For purposes of the law against discrimination, pregnant means pregnancy, childbirth, medical conditions related to childbirth or pregnancy, including recovery from childbirth. Reasonable accommodations related to pregnancy can include, but are not limited to, bathroom breaks, breaks for increased water intake, periodic rest, assistance for manual labor, job restructuring or modified work schedules, and/or temporary transfers to less strenuous or hazardous work. An employer cannot subject an employee to differential treatment, harassment, or retaliation for requesting a workplace accommodation due to pregnancy. The Division on Civil Rights interprets the law against discrimination to include chest feeding as well as breastfeeding. Chest feeding is a term that can be used by cisgender and transgender parents alike. It's a way to describe feeding your baby. Because breastfeeding isn't exclusive to cisgender women, it's important to have terminology that feels inclusive to all parents, no matter their gender. For purposes of the law against discrimination, breastfeeding means breastfeeding or expressing milk for breastfeeding or medical conditions related to breastfeeding. The employer must provide reasonable accommodations related to breastfeeding, chest feeding, included but not limited to reasonable break time each day to the employee to which express milk, and a suitable room other location with privacy other than a bathroom stall, in close proximity to the work area for the employee to express milk for the child. Now we're going to pivot. And we're going to talk about understanding the differences between federal law, the Family Medical Leave Act, and the New Jersey State Law, Family Leave Act. Employees in New Jersey can be eligible for the Federal Medical Leave Act and the New Jersey Family Leave Act. However, the laws are different regulations, benefits, and reasons for types of leaves. The Federal Medical Leave Act is enforced by the United States Department of Labor. and is for caring for a family or for the employee's own medical issues. The New Jersey Division on Civil Rights enforces the New Jersey Family Leave Act. And the New Jersey Family Leave Act provides individuals job-protected leave to care for loved ones. Under the federal law, FMLA, this entitles eligible employees of covered employers to take unpaid job-protected leave for specified family and medical reasons with continuation of group health insurance coverage under the same terms and conditions as if the employee had not taken leave. Under the Federal Medical Leave Act, eligible employees are employees who have worked a total of 1,250 hours in the past 12 months for a covered employee to take up to 12 weeks of job-protected family leave and medical leave within a 12-month period due to a triggering event. Now, a covered employee includes private employers, public agencies, public and private elementary schools. And the triggering event includes to care for a family member with a serious health condition or an employee's own disability, or to take care or bond with a newly born or adopted child or child placed in foster care. The New Jersey Family Leave Act was enacted in 1989. It allows eligible employees who have worked at least 1,000 hours in the past 12 months for a covered employer to take up to 12 weeks of job-protected family leave within a 24-month period due to a triggering event. A triggering event is considered to care for or bond with a child as long as the leave begins within 1 year of the child's birth or placement for adoption or foster care. To care for a family member or someone who is equivalent to a family member with a serious health condition, or to provide required care or treatment for a child during a state of emergency if their school or place of care is closed by order of public health officials due to a communicable disease or other public health emergencies. Now, you can take 12 weeks of leave in a consecutive block, intermittent, or reduced schedule. Under the rules, eligible employees are generally entitled to return to the same position they held prior to taking family leave, and your employer may not retaliate against you because you took or attempted to take leave under New Jersey Family Leave Act. Once again, it's important to highlight that the New Jersey Family Leave Act is not the same as the Federal Medical Leave Act, so you will not use up your New Jersey Family Leave Act leave while taking leave for your own serious medical condition under the Federal Medical Leave Act. In some situations, you therefore may be entitled to take up to 12 weeks of the federal leave for your own condition and 12 weeks of state leave to take care of a family member in a single 12-month period. If you are pregnant or just had a baby, you can take up to 12 weeks for pregnancy and recovery from childbirth under the Federal Medical Leave Act, and you could take an additional 12 weeks of New Jersey family leave to bond with or care for your baby after your doctor certifies that you're fit to return to work or you have exhausted your Federal Medical Leave Act leave, whichever is first. It's important to highlight that any parent can take leave under the New Jersey Family Leave Act to bond with or care for a newborn or child just placed for adoption or foster care. Examples of Division on Civil Rights jurisdiction regarding the law against discrimination, the New Jersey Family Leave Act. In 2022, the Division on Civil Rights obtained a $195,000 settlement on behalf of a former corporate marketing director who alleged she was retaliated against and ultimately fired for taking pregnancy-related family leave time available to her under state law and seeking a reasonable accommodation related to breastfeeding. In 2021, Division on Civil Rights obtained a $25,000 settlement on behalf of a former packager who alleged that the company denied her request for pregnancy-related accommodations included as-needed bathroom breaks and a 20-pound limit on any items she would be assigned to lift. Also in 2021, Division on Civil Rights issued a finding of probable cause against a national retailer, America's Best Contact and Eyeglasses, Inc., for allegedly subjecting a former employee to discrimination based on her pregnancy and for failing to provide her with a suitable place to express breast milk. If you believe that you have been discriminated against or subjected to harassment, you can file a complaint with the Division on Civil Rights via the New Jersey Bias Investigation Access System, NJBIAS, at bias.njcivilrights.gov. Please note that the statute of limitations is 180 days from the last alleged violation. You can also call 1-833-NJ-DCR for you or 711-RELAY and ask a DCR receptionist to assist you in filling out the forms on NJBIAS. For systemic issues, please email communityrelations@njcivilrights.gov. Thank you. This concludes the DCR presentation portion of this program tonight. Hi, y'all. I am back. I apologize for that technical difficulty. And thank you, Jonathan, for taking over and keeping the show going.
Very welcome. We are at the panelist discussion, and Tisha, I give the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, for anyone who has tried to take paid family leave, it may be confusing how to take leave and how to protect your job. Can you talk about the programs that the Department of Labor provides and talk to any differences between the New Jersey programs to the federal programs?
Yes. Hi, Tisha. Thank you. And thank you for having us here joining this panel discussion. So I can tell you what our role is as it relates to paid family and medical leave, and a little bit about the difference in the laws. So basically, New Jersey workers should be aware that paid family leave has two parts to it. Right? There's the cash benefits and then the state and federal job protection laws. So we at the Department of Labor administer the cash benefits. And there are two kinds of cash benefits. First, there's paid family, which is family leave insurance that provides cash benefits when you have to stop working to care for a family member or bond with a new child. We also administer the temporary disability insurance, which is when you must stop working to care for your own illness or an injury or for pregnancy and childbirth recovery. So there are earning requirements that you must meet to get the cash benefits, but most New Jersey workers are covered under the law. The state and federal protection laws, Family Leave Act and Family and Medical Leave Act, are different. They give you the right to return to your job after you leave, and you could be covered under them while you're taking these benefits. We have helpful handouts for new parents that explains all of this, as well as information for other people who need paid family or medical family leave at our website at myleavebenefits.nj.gov.
Thank you for all that information. And I believe that we did include your links and some of your handouts in our resource document that's also being dropped in the chat. Can you talk to what kind of programs does the Department of Labor provide and how these programs help ensure women's work rights?
Yes. First, I'd say that New Jersey has some of the most progressive labor laws in the country. And New Jersey enforces them, right? And regardless of workers' immigration status. So we're on the path to $15 minimum wage. We have earned sick leave and paid family and medical leave, which are key programs for women. NJDOL is working to combat misclassification, which is when a worker is improperly classified as an independent contractor and denied many work rights and benefits. Misclassification, unfortunately, frequently occurs in low-wage industries that are majority women. So as we raise awareness and enforce these laws, our task is to ensure equity for all women and for those who identify as women, and in particular, Black, Latina, Asian American, and Native American women. And this is not easy, right? This is why we value our partnerships with trusted community-based organizations. We need them to help us understand the lived experiences of women workers who have been left behind for far too long, how to reach them, and how to better enforce the laws that protect them.
Thank you for that, Julie. Deborah, we keep hearing about the Great Resignation and how women have been dropping out of the labor workforce in large numbers. Can you share what's your take on this and what you're seeing in New Jersey?
Sure, I think that's such a great question. And I'd say that the Great Resignation narrative hasn't actually held up to the headlines. The numbers just don't support it. It may be true that workers have been quitting jobs and leaving for better jobs, but New Jersey is certainly working, and so are New Jersey's women. But I'd like to contextualize it just a little bit, because it doesn't mean that things are back to normal. And I also just want to remind ourselves that normal also had, its fair share of challenges. So like what we know is, and I think you went over some of this information in the introductory remarks, is that women certainly in the early days of the pandemic experienced more unemployment than men. And this was even more true for Black women and Latinas. If you think about where women are concentrated in the labor market, that helps explain why we saw those high unemployment rates for women, retail, hospitality, and parts of healthcare, right? So dentist's office weren't seeing patients in those early days. And virtually the entire childcare sector was closed for a period of time. And then, parts of it opened up for essential workers early on. I thought New Jersey did a pretty good job at that during those really kind of scary times. So, and many women across the state have struggled to fully participate in the paid workforce, given the ongoing disruptions to childcare and K-12 education that were triggered, by the public health crisis that kept evolving. And so some analysis we did at the Center for Women in Work indicates that from April 2021, so this is, after vaccines started rolling out, through December 2021, nearly 1/4 of New Jersey households with children under the age of 12 experienced a disruption to their childcare arrangements. And so, that has an effect on, I don't think it's causing a great resignation, but I think it's causing a lot of disruption and stress. And we do see women at the lower wage jobs losing income and jobs as a result of those types of disruptions. So like in the aggregate, in the big picture, people are really back at work, but that can sometimes cloud some of the other types of suffering and disruption and losses that are going on. So I hope that helps.
It definitely does. And Suzanne, what is your take?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Deborah. I do think it's really important to look at those early months, because the impact, as large scale as it was, revealed a lot about structural impediments to equality for women. We saw a really pronounced exodus of women from the paid workforce. As Deborah said, people have been coming back, including women. But we saw that time period, and continues to be the case, where you have women who are disproportionately represented in areas of the job market that did witness job loss at that time. Many of those jobs involved face-to-face interaction. That was particularly the case when you talk about women of color, or they involved care, right? Child care and other kinds of care. They were going to be more likely to leave the paid workforce due to increased care obligations during those early months and during continued shutdowns. And so that response at that time really revealed these deeper structural issues that showed how we organize and prioritize or not prioritize care in our economy and through our social systems, and also showed a lot about gendered and racialized stratification of the workforce. So I think there's important lessons to be learned from that time period. It really revealed underlying patterns, in some ways exacerbated some of those, and definitely revealed a lot of work to be done.
And what are some of the other challenges individuals that identify as women faced during the COVID-19 pandemic when it came to employment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's been widely noted, and I think there's so many government agencies and organizations and advocates and commentators across the board in the United States who've been focusing on the way that the pandemic has revealed deficiencies in terms of the US system's support of women's workforce participation, and also ways that we can address caregiving that's being done as part of the paid workforce, but also caregiving that's unpaid, that's done by the workforce at home. So we've had obviously such amazing advances toward greater parity in the family, laws related to family, but laws related to the workplace. But the pandemic, as I noted, was really showing this continued stratification in the US labor force. Again, with losses hitting hardest industries where we saw women concentrated, including restaurants and retail and hospitality and healthcare and childcare. And the economic impacts of those job losses were particularly pronounced for women of color who are more concentrated in those sectors of the economy, and particularly in the lowest paid rungs of those sectors. So the pandemic's also showing, the enduring gaps in U.S. policy concerning support for caregivers, workers who are caregivers of children and caregivers of other family members. Showed the stratification based on race and gender with regard to who was deemed an essential worker or not. And for those who were able to work remotely, mothers, as we know, continue to face disproportionate burden for caregiving. And when schools were not in person, also disproportionate burdens associated with schooling. So we saw kind of exacerbation of that workforce push out that happens to caregivers and can happen to mothers, and that was just exacerbated even further, through the pandemic.
Thank you for that, Suzanne. Deborah, how has the gender wage gap contributed to income inequality in New Jersey during the pandemic? And how does that intersectionality of race, sexual orientation, or gender impact the wage gap?
Yeah, so that's a great question and complicated, and so I may not be addressing the first half of that question directly. Because I was thinking about this, and I mean, honestly, I think a major contributor to income inequality is actually a lack of what I would argue are good jobs, especially in sectors that I think, Suzanne just touched upon, that rely upon the labor of women. And so Black women, Latinas, and immigrant women in particular are overrepresented in low wage, and we use this word a lot now, essential jobs that many of us rely on so that we can participate in the paid labor force. And so here I'm thinking especially about those who work in childcare, early childcare, or early childhood and elder care. And we still, if you talk with childcare operators, so childcare directors right now, they're struggling to fill classrooms with teachers and childcare providers. And it's not a lot, it's those, unfortunately, those positions and that work doesn't support a family. And it tends to be minimum wage work. It's work that we, say we value as a society, but we just haven't invested in the infrastructure. And so that's really, that industry, childcare, hasn't recovered from the initial shutdown. New Jersey's been particularly slow to bring back the workforce. And again, when we look at our numbers in New Jersey, it's not that women aren't working or don't want to work. There's better jobs available. And so these jobs that women have been kind of relegated to, or that have done traditionally, continue to be undervalued. And individual families, of course, the average person isn't, going to on their own be able to subsidize or lift up the wages and benefits of that workforce. So we really need to look at addressing this through policy solutions, and kind of have this, public dialogue and talks with policymakers about what some of those solutions are, and treat some of these industries more as the public good that they actually are. And I think, so I really do think, when that's not to say that the wage gap also exists because of discrimination that continues. And I know that that's, what your department helps people with when they run into these challenges, or they think they are not receiving equal pay for the equal work. And so that's really important for workers to know what their rights are, and to kind of understand, it's where pay transparency can be helpful. So discrimination absolutely exists. I think, oftentimes when I think about the gender wage gap, I tend to think about where women are segregated, and where work is undervalued. And so that's one avenue to address the persistence of the gender wage gap, is figure out how some of those undervalued jobs could be elevated in terms of wages and benefits. And then, of course, your second question, there continues to be discrimination in workplaces. And you probably have more expertise on how to address that than I do, but certainly, there's data that supports that continues to be a challenge as well, and explains part of the gender wage gap.
Thank you for that. And yes, you're absolutely right. A lot of times we see that constituents aren't fully aware of their rights, and that's why programs like tonight are important, to educate constituents of New Jersey, regardless of your immigration status, of what your rights are, especially when it comes to pay discrimination. And Suzanne, can you speak a little bit to what Deborah was talking to in regards to the gender wage gap and how it intersects with race and sexual orientation, so on and so forth?
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with Deborah that it's incredibly important to look at this stratification of the workforce and the ways that we pay certain sectors. And absolutely, childcare is a perfect example of an industry where we devalue the work of childcare workers and other kinds of care workers. And it's consistent in some ways with what we see in terms of the dynamics of when women start to move into a particular job sector, then wages tend to go down in that, even if, so I think that that's really important to actually look at that as part of the conversation about wages and about pay. So I completely agree. And, I do think when we look at impacts of unemployment and impacts of leaving the workforce, though, inspired by recent events with the pandemic, those patterns are likely to have long-term consequences for women's economic stability. They're likely to exacerbate the wage gap and exacerbate things like the motherhood penalty on women's wages. Before even the pandemic, women's workforce participation in the United States lagged behind some other advanced economies. And one key factor that's been identified is the absence of effective caregiver policies that are nationally mandated, such as well-paid child force, but also affordable childcare and guaranteed widely available paid family leave. So those are important factors. even with returns back to the workforce, there have been still some gender gaps. And if women are not participating in the workforce as robustly, this is going to have impacts on women, families, and children. For instance, in families of color, women are more likely to be the sole or primary breadwinner. So the workforce participation piece is really important for economic stability.
Thank you for that. Deborah, Women's Equal Pay Day was earlier than has ever been this year. Is that a sign of progress?
So yes and no. It's Women's Equal Pay Day. It's always like a struggle for us at the Center for Women in Work, believe it or not, because, and here's why. So here's the thing. So gender wage gaps have typically been calculated using the wages of workers who are employed full-time and year-round. So part-time and seasonal workers aren't included. So when we use these parameters to calculate the gender wage gap, it sometimes muddles the whole picture of the economic challenges that New Jersey women were confronting during the pandemic. So many low-income full-time workers moved to part-time during the pandemic, and some were forced to leave their jobs entirely. So again, think about the demands on women for childcare, et cetera. Not everyone's working at home, and many women did not have the option of working at home, and also had childcare, elder care responsibilities. So with fewer of the lowest paid women included in the measurement, the median annual earnings for full-time year-round working women increased sharply then between 2019 and 2020. And that's why we had Equal Pay Day earlier in the year. But keep in mind, the workers who were able to retain full-time work were already among the more privileged and higher paid workers before the pandemic emerge. So again, this is kind of like I would love to come up with a graphic. I'm just not creative. So that because I think it's kind of a cool story, or it's an interesting story to kind of visualize. And someone out there is probably, maybe they've already done it. But the exit of the lower paid full-time women from the full-time work pool exit of lower paid full-time women inflated the wages of full-time workers in 2020. So that's kind of the pandemic story on the gender wage gap. We've been paying more attention for a variety of reasons, working with some stakeholders in the community, really concerned about the pay gap for Latinas in New Jersey, which is quite large relative to the rest of the country. And it looks like that is going to be, while the kind of all Women's Equal Pay Day was earlier, for Latinas, it's going to be much later in the year. And the reason is because so many of them had to drop out of the workforce for a period of time or reduce their hours. So, it's definitely something to pay attention to. I think it's one measure, but it has all these limitations and a lot of moving parts. So I hope that wasn't, so if anyone out there can come up with a visual, contact me, a better way to kind of like illustrate this story.
I definitely agree that visuals always really bring the message home.
Yeah.
Can you talk to your center and others that have done research on the paid family leave, often noting that not enough people know about taking paid leave? And can you talk a little bit about what you think those barriers are?
Sure. I mean, I think so. I feel very proud of New Jersey and the fact that we're one of like 9 states that have paid family leave. So I know we talk a lot about deficits and how things need to get better, but I'm really proud to be in a state that actually has a paid family leave program that was expanded. I think it was right before the pandemic. I don't have the date right in front of me. My colleagues definitely know it. For 12 weeks of bonding, up to 85% wage replacement. We're a state that learned about some of those implementation challenges and then adjust the legislation and and expanded paid family leave. We have a really inclusive definition of family. But I do think it's a policy, you know, as inclusive and progressive, I think, as it's meant to be, is ahead of our culture in many ways. And so I think some, you know, so there's that. And then I think some of the barriers are that it's really, you know, it's challenging to get policies to the people they're intended to support. And we have employers of all shapes and sizes out there. And we have workers who work around or move around in the workforce. And I think, you know, reaching them has been a kind of a persistent challenge. But I think I'm sure my colleagues from the Department of Labor will be able to lift up some of the work that I know they've been doing to try and address some of the awareness challenges.
That's a great point and a great segue to Julie, if you want to give us DOL's perspective, speaking from the I in regards to what do you think some of those barriers are for people not knowing about or taking their paid family leave?
Of course. Yeah, one of our main barriers we see is confusion about how to access paid family leave and medical leave in New Jersey because of the different benefits and job protection laws that we spoke about. There's a lack of awareness, as well as legitimate barriers like fear of losing one's job or not getting a promotion. At New Jersey Department of Labor, at the start of this administration, we created an office dedicated to strategic outreach on paid leave. And we're establishing an outreach team within temporary disability and family leave insurance divisions. We now currently have a community relations manager. Some of our initiatives include revamping a new website called myleavebenefits.nj.gov that explains paid family leave benefits, and the state and federal job protection laws are included. We're constantly improving upon the site and adding more resources. We also launched a paid family leave bilingual social media ad campaign in 2020 and 2021, focused on Black and Latino fathers and partners, and received millions of impressions on social media. We built an employer toolkit because they are one of the main ways people learn of their paid family and medical leave. We just released a grant program for $1.1 million to fund community-based organizations to help us do education and outreach on paid family and medical leave and paid sick, and reach populations that are less likely to have access to paid leave. We also support the First Lady's Nurture New Jersey initiative, which I hope most of you here have heard about, that works to reduce Black maternal mortality and participate in her family festivals to raise awareness in communities that are less likely to have access to paid leave. So, and some of the workplace challenges, some of which I already touched on, which was misclassification, huge workplace challenge for women in the 21st century. Misclassification deprives workers of rights guaranteed to employees, but not independent contractors and those paid in cash off the books. And we're talking about the right to minimum wage overtime, to receive benefits if injured on the job, the right to earn sick leave, to take job protected family leave and receive family leave benefits, to receive health and safety protections, as well as protection under state and federal anti-discrimination laws. So as noted earlier, many of these industries, we see high rates of misclassification, have high rates of women. For example, home care, housekeeping, delivery and janitorial sectors.
Thank you for that. And how do you think the Department of Labor, the laws and the programs support women workers in the aftermath of what we hope was the worst of the COVID?
Yes, the pandemic has disproportionately harmed women, as we heard earlier from our two panelists, and women of color especially, in large part due to caregiving demands. Women need time off to care for themselves, and earned sick leave and paid family and medical leave benefits are available for that. We want women workers, especially our frontline workers, to understand that temporary disability insurance isn't just for physical health. It's for mental health too, with a medical provider's certification. In addition, partners and husbands of women should know that our paid leave laws are also for them to help bear the burden of caregiving. We need employers to encourage this and help lift barriers that prevent men from taking family leave. For women who may have been homemakers who lost a spouse to COVID-19 and are now a sole breadwinner, we want them to know that we have special workforce development programs for them.
And I know that tonight's topic has focal point has been women's rights, but it's clear to say that all of these programs and benefits that we talked about cover all constituents of New Jersey, regardless of their race, sexual orientation, gender identity expression.
Yes.
And before we move on to the question and answer portion of the program, do you, Julie, Deborah, or Suzanne, have any last thoughts that you would like to share with our attendees tonight?
For me, I'll just want people to know that we do have a lot of resources. There's a lot of information that was given out today. There's a lot more information to learn about these programs. So if I can again put our website out there, myleavebenefits.nj.gov, where we have comprehensive resources, but easy to read resources, and different graphics and charts that'll help you navigate. We also have contact information if you need more information from us. And if I can have a moment, just introduce my colleagues here that can help during the Q&A in case we have more technical or policy related questions. First is Holly Lowe, and she's from our Office of Strategic Enforcement and has been, hi Holly, has been doing a lot of this work, or most of this work, early on in building this office, and David Vander, our Executive Policy Director as well.
Perfect, thank you. And Suzanne and Deborah, do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, thanks so much. You know, it's been such a pleasure. And I did want to actually join my colleagues in commending the New Jersey Paid Family Leave Act. I am also incredibly proud that we have paid family leave, and the inclusive definition of family really also is at the vanguard in the country in terms of coverage. So I wanted to lift that up. Yeah, delighted and really excited. I think that New Jersey is really at the forefront of so much of this important change.
Thank you for that. And Deborah, any last words?
I just wanted to thank you for having me in the Center for Women Work in this conversation. I always learn something from these events and these conversations. And I think that, you know, we do have some policies, you know, in thinking about paid family leave and caregiving in particular. You know, I think employers have a role, the state has a role, kind of community organizations all have a role in helping us implement these policies in kind of gender neutral ways, right? So we don't want caregivers just to be women, you know, and I know we talk about caregiving, and I do it myself, as a burden, but it's also a joy. In some cases, it's not always, you know, a tragic event, thankfully, in our lives. Sometimes it's welcoming a new child, and that, you know, I'm not an expert in this, but we do know that the research evidence is that those early relational, like, you know, all those neurons and everything make it, having parents, whether it's the birth parent, a partner, there in those early days and throughout the child's first year of life makes a huge difference. And so, we really need the village to kind of be involved in the equitable implementation of this of paid family leave and earned sick leave and things like this. So we want to encourage not just women, but the men and other people involved in a family's life and being part of caregiving. And I do think that burden and that opportunity is for employers, it's for my colleagues at the Department of Labor, it's for research centers like ours, to all figure out how we can be part of that implementation. Because I think that's how we advance gender equity, how it contributes to advancing racial equity if we do it right. But it won't just passing the legislation and policies and enforcement are just one or just they're important pieces, but just we need a lot of other activity going on to make sure we fully embrace the promise of these policies that we have.
You're absolutely correct. I'm just wondering, how can individuals stay connected with you, with your organization, to stay up to date with the programs and research? I've gone through the Rutgers Center for Women in Work website, and I found a lot of great resources in regards to, and I'm speaking from the I, in terms of your COVID fact sheet, which was actually added to our resource packet, your report on the paid family leave. Besides the website, how else can people engage with the Center for Women at Work?
That's a great question. And I really want to thank you and your colleagues for hosting us. This is one way we have forums in which we can talk about some of our work. But the website is probably the primary way. I am always happy to talk with colleagues, with members of the public, if there's research questions. We're at Rutgers, we're what they call a land grant institution. We're really committed to working with community-based organizations and stakeholders on the ground, employers. So if you do have research questions or programmatic needs, you could reach out. And if we can't help you, we can probably connect you with someone who can. Rutgers is huge. Suzanne is from Rutgers. I only connected with her recently on a project, but we're happy to serve as a resource. So our website's a great place to start. We've also are partnering with an organization at the Blaustein School, New Jersey Policy Lab. And we've been, and we will be releasing a report on the status of women in New Jersey. It's an intersectional analysis on how women have done throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would say it's not just about women, it's about women and their households. And it covers some of these issues that we talked about tonight. So stay tuned for that. We should be releasing it in a couple of weeks.
I'm looking forward to it. I've already signed up for your emails. And Suzanne, I know that you are the founding director of Rutgers Center for Gender, Sexuality, Law, and Policy. And you're also a professor of law at Rutgers Law School. How can constituents stay engaged with what your center is doing, what Rutgers Law School is doing? What are the best means?
Sure, thank you. And thanks so much for having me. I'll put in the chat a link to the website. There people can sign up for the newsletter, follow, see the different social media platforms. And we do a lot in terms of collaborations with folks. We've been focusing, and we're relatively a new entity, but have been focusing on trying to convene academics and students, practitioners, policymakers on areas of mutual interest. We have been rolling out programs having to do with relevant to women in the workforce and women in the legal profession. And as Deborah mentioned, we've been in dialogue about one of their recent projects. I'm super excited about that. And so folks are interested, they should follow us through those various means that I mentioned, and always happy to talk to people who are interested in collaborating on putting on programs together and engaging in other ways.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I've already signed up for your email blast as well. And Julie, how can we stay engaged with DOL? How can we find out about your upcoming programs? I know you talked a little bit about your social media campaign. Do you want to share those hashtags or handles with our attendees tonight?
Yes. Again, I'll say our website where most of the resources for all these programs is myleavebenefits.nj.gov. That is in the chat. And as we're speaking, Holly is dropping in a couple more. Oh, she added our main website where you can also sign up for, I believe you can sign up for news information, but definitely our Twitter, we do post a lot of updates on social media. Facebook is not available at the moment, but Twitter is.
Okay, perfect. And Holly and David Banner, are there any last minute words or things that you would like to share with our attendees tonight? I know that we had asked you to come on as our resource backup, but I definitely do want to give you the opportunity. We haven't gotten any questions in the chat or the Q&A, which only leads me to believe that I think we covered all our bases. So just in case, I wanted to give you that opportunity.
Thank you. No, I have nothing to share. I really appreciated the conversation and I'm very grateful for this event. Thank you to the Division on Civil Rights for having us.
Yes.
I also don't have anything to add.
Oh, thank you so much.
Very modest. Those are very modest too, but between policy and office, they're the ones that make it happen. Okay, just.
Yes, thank you so much. So with that said, I want to extend my thank yous to our amazing panelists, our resource, I call them our superheroes in the background. Julie, Suzanne, Deborah, David.
That was your staff, I'm sorry.
Oh, wait, I'm getting to them. As well as I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my team, Jonathan Green for coming in to save the day when my internet failed, for Patricia Williamson for running logistics, as well as David Williams for also helping in the background and running our chat. Thank you to you attendees for taking time out of your lives to join us and learn about this information. I also want to invite you to our next program, which is going to be happening on I'm already having some months ahead, on May 4th at 7 o'clock. I repeat, May 4th at 7 o'clock. It's going to be a DCR co-sponsored virtual program with Ridgewood Ambassadors for Global Citizenship. It's called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Social Emotional Learning K through 12. And we've dropped the registration link in the chat. We also welcome you to sign up for our emails and websites. Stay in contact with us. We're also dropped tonight's program survey. Please let us know how we did, how we could do better next time. And with that, thank you for joining us tonight, and until next time.